I want to do another lore video and give a psychoanalysis of the poem at the end of The Deep. The poem, which is voiced by me, it's voiced in the collective utterance of the dwellers in the deep, and it functions as a disturbed prophetic monologue from a psyche trapped in eternal regression. It reveals a fractured, self-aware, yet self-sabotaging mind or group mind, consumed by cycles of trauma, shame, avoidance. Even though that's kind of a repetitive theme throughout the stories on my channel, but I did that on purpose. I want them to seem cohesive, and the lore and the psychology and the philosophy to be even throughout. I wanted to incorporate the shadow of self made literal. The dwellers represent the archetypical shadow, all the repressed, ugly, primal aspects of the human psyche that civilized consciousness rejects. There's phrases in the story like, "Within caves are dwelling your agony and hunger, and in the face of light cowardice drives thee back into the depths." This is in the poem in certain parts, and other refined versions of it. I have other versions of the poem as well, not just the one that's on the channel. It shows a psyche that knows the truth, that light equals consciousness, integration, self-knowledge, but actively flees it. It's classic resistance to individuation. The dwellers are not merely evil, they are terrified of becoming whole because wholeness would require confronting their own monstrosity. The poem repeatedly frames enlightenment as painful or fatal. "Let the light illuminate" is immediately undercut by cowardice. Now, I just wanted to reiterate another point, that there are different versions of this poem, and what I mean by that in universe is the dwellers in the deep themselves did write a version of this when they were still literate. They're not literate anymore, but there was a time as the eons went by where they actually were and could write a little bit. And there's also versions of people on the surface who may have knowledge of them and have written different versions of the poem as well. So if you're confused at certain parts of this and you hear certain phrasings that aren't in the video posted on Advent Wrath YouTube channel and on Rumble, that's why, that there's different versions of this story. So when you hear it, just accept it as an alternate version from a different group of people. This could also be seen as intergenerational trauma in the cycle of abuse, though that's a more modern term. I don't know if the dwellers in the deep actually are reminiscent or consciously aware of that fact. I don't think they would be. But a dominant psychological thread is in the inherited curse, that thou feedest upon thine own kin, thou breedest in blood, spawning wilful children of hungered flesh and rancid blood, forcefully bred in fear, war, and fire. This depicts repetition compulsion. Victims become perpetrators, passing trauma down through literal incest, cannibalism, and violence. So it is there. The dwellers are both victims, they're trampled spirits, scapegoats of violence and self-hate, and willing continuators of the horror. Psychologically, it mirrors real-world cycles of familial abuse, but I think that's too modern. Addiction and poverty, which you can apply if you want to, where each generation normalizes the dysfunction because it's the only attachment model they know, but that would be more of a modern concept. I don't know if the psychology of the dwellers in the deep is sophisticated enough to understand, or it functions in that way, but it's not sophisticated enough to truly understand it. The poem's fatalism, "thou shalt inherit hell," suggests learned helplessness, which is definitely a thing with them. Merged with perverse pride, they don't just suffer the cycle, they mythologize it and sacralize it, Sabbaths of blood and breath. There's also a bit of self-loathing masked as prophecy, which is prevalent through a lot of the stories here, because once again, I want that cohesive psychology and philosophy. That's why you'll see this repeat itself a lot. There's profound internalized shame and splitting. The dwellers project their depravity outward. Consumption devours the essence of all depravity, while simultaneously confessing it, so there's a duality there. They describe themselves with visceral disgust, rancid blood, rotten heels, willful rot, poverty of burned spirits, yet speak with grandiose biblical tone. This is classic narcissistic defense in degraded form, grandiosity used to cope with worthlessness, which is another ongoing theme and also a very generalized theme in society as well. The constant oscillation between "we dwell in your agony" and accusatory "thou" blurs the line between self and other. They are simultaneously describing themselves and addressing surface humanity, implying we are the unconscious, we are what you deny, that sort of thing. Fear of desire and the death drive, this is a big theme. Lines like "unconscious desire brings not but pain and suffering," and "hedonist that thou art, no pleasure in their own flesh." That is a line from the more sophisticated version from the surface dwellers that you guys didn't get to see. It reveals a psyche where pleasure has been poisoned. Any drive toward life, connection, or satisfaction loops back into destruction. This is the Thanatos-dominated death drive psychology. Libido is twisted into cannibalistic incorporation of the other and the self. Sex, food, and reproduction will become act of violence, merging rather than union or creation. It's defensive regression and claustrophilic attachment. The cave symbolized both literal and psychological regression. That is true. I think that's obvious. Retreating into the womb-like or tomb-like darkness to avoid the demands of adult consciousness and reality. Once again, I don't think the dwellers are that sophisticated to know that, but psychologically that may also be a thing, but they're nowhere near sophisticated enough to realize that. The dwellers are attached to the prison. Light is not salvation, it is a threat. This mirrors severe avoidant or disorganized attachment styles where the known horror feels safer than the uncertain growth, which is another thing prevalent in society. The poem gives us mind or a culture that is hyper aware yet willfully blind, which is what I was going for. It sees its own evil clearly, but reframes it as a destiny. Trapped in projective identification, forcing its darkness into the listener or reader / you, your agony, thine will, that kind of thing. Simultaneously pathetic and menacing. They're pitiful in its self-loathing, terrifying in its hunger to reproduce itself. I think it works pretty well because it just doesn't show monsters. It shows a monstrous defense system against unbearable self-knowledge, which self-knowledge and introspection is terrifying to most people. The dwellers aren't stupid brutes. They're eloquent in their damnation. Their eloquence makes them even more disturbing. They understand exactly what they are, and they choose or are compelled to remain in it. In short, I wanted it to be a psychological portrait of repressed humanity's revenge in a certain way. The part of us that would rather devour itself in the dark forever than risk the terror of becoming seen. The refined version sharpens itself and gives a voice, greater clarity, and ritual power without losing its raw, tormented quality. I wanted to address the ancient Sumerian quotation marks at the beginning of the story. After the narrator's little story, you get some ancient quote-unquote Sumerian. I actually translated real Sumerian, but it sounded way too elegant so I broke it up and created kind of a pseudo-Sumerian, and I kind of wanted to cover that. Now, the words in it you'll hear, there's one like kar, which is real, which means to harbor or market, or to harbor, to escape, to take, steal. Min, which means crown, to crown. Zu, to know, things like that. Good, Gud, which means bull or ox. You get things, and there's a like Nikelmu, which is made up, not standard. It basically means the evil eye. That was kind of made up. It's a fictionalized Sumerian. There's no coherent meaning, but what it loosely translates to is a kind of a ritual. If it's crown, no bull, which the bull is a big symbol in Sumerian culture. Crown the bull, used to clay the earth to divide. Is body, in the body, reveal with fire, burn the body, the powers that be. And then they refer to them as dogs with malevolent looks. That's referring to the deep dwellers. It's a ritual to kind of seal them away. I wanted to cover something. A lot of the poetry I use in Advent Wrath, I used a dyad prose style, which when I was in literary circles got me a lot of grief. Because when I write poetry, I don't really rely on if it rhymes, if everything lines up correctly. I think it would be a very archaic, very insane scribblings because these people, anyone who would engage in any of these stories are absolutely insane. So anything they write would not line up with proper literature. But they would say this line, for instance, musings linger in love's lost sanction of mortal tangent. They'll go, well, that makes no sense. But it does if you use the dyad prose poetry style. The meaning of the word sanction. You have to find which word has a dual meaning, which is how they would secretly put messages to one another. When you would read their poetry, you'd be like, oh, this makes no sense, until you realize, okay, some definitions of the words in this sentence, they have two definitions and they both apply. Where sanction would mean a penalty for disobeying a law or a rule, it also means an official or permission or approval for an action. Thus, it gives us two distinct but similar definitions of the sentence. Musings linger in love's lost sanction of mortal tangent. Then, once you examine sanction, becomes musings linger in love's lost threat for disobeying the law of mortal tangent. Then it becomes musings linger in love's lost permission for the action of mortal tangent. It's the way a lot of the poetry works in Advent Wrath. There's a layered meaning, there's a hidden meaning, and they would use this as a means of communication or giving a subliminal or a secret message. And with that, I just wanted to throw that in there. I hope you guys have fun. This was also inspired by Plato's allegory of the cave, obvious. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you had fun. And join us for more here at Advent Wrath.